Welcome to Blessed Be the Breakdown, the podcast where I go over the Testaments episodes. Today I'll be covering episode 5, Ball. At the end of this episode, I will also be going over some parallels or comparisons to the Testaments book, so stick around for that. As always, if you haven't watched this episode yet, I would recommend going to watch and coming back. Let's get into it. This episode is essentially about Gilead's prom of sorts. Instead of going with people they want to go with, though, or people their age, men their age, they're going with these older men. And basically, this is just them parading around to show off for these commanders so they can get picked. The first thing I wanted to touch on was Agnes and her carryover from last episode and everything that happened at the dentist. So we see her get to the ball, right? And in the beginning, she's kind of like talking to herself, saying, okay, you know what? I'm not going to let this ruin my time. So she tries to put on a happy face. But when she gets to the ball, I think her seeing Becca really triggers what happened to her. And she's kind of misrepresenting that hate towards Becca because that is Becca's dad that did that to her, which made me feel not only really bad for Agnes, but bad for Becca as well, because she just... that's her best friend, right? She's seemingly closer to Becca than anybody else there. They called themselves best friends at the beginning of the show. And now all of a sudden your best friend is acting cold to you and you don't know why. Now we know why as the audience, but she doesn't. So you can just tell that puts Becca in this really sour mood, and she's kind of probably internally panicking or having anxiety, because I know I would. I'd be just racking my brain to see oh my gosh, what did I do? Why is she mad? She doesn't understand, which is understandable, but it's also very understandable what Agnes is going through with everything and how she feels. Her feelings are valid, although her feelings towards Becca's dad were misplaced towards Becca. She still, she's going through a lot. She's a young teenage girl who just went through this traumatic situation, and now she's trying to figure out how to deal with it. In this episode, we see Shunammite and Hilda drinking this tea. Well, mostly Shunammite. She is hoping that this tea is going to really start her womanhood. Her period comes, right? That's what she wants. And it's so funny because this episode, them two are kind of background characters, not really main in the scenes. And the small bits we get from them are kind of funny, right? They're the comic relief of this episode, because we get not only them drinking that weird tea and then Hilda wanting some, and then Shunammite just being nah, this is for me. We get that, but we also get when Shunammite is to Hilda, it's not your time. Maybe there's a reason it's not your time. And then Hilda's oh yeah, it's not your time either. So maybe there's a reason it's not your time. And that was just so funny to me because Shunammite was clearly just pissed off, right? But I loved that she finally stood up for herself and shot back at her. And then when we get the dance scenes, I'm wondering they have obviously practiced or been taught how to do this dance like the girls have, but we don't see much of the men or the boys. And these boys know how to dance, right? We see in this episode Garth dancing with Agnes, and he knows the dance. He just jumps in and dances. Are they getting taught the dance too? That was one thing that's kind of not really important, but I was thinking about, they must, I'm sure they're getting taught this, or else how would they know? But that's one thing that I was wait, how are they learning this dance? So I'm guessing they go to some sort of school. So like I said a while ago, we see Agnes and Garth dancing, and this is really just igniting her, I guess love, we can call it love for Garth. This is really making her want that with him compared to these older men. And I think she even mentions that how it's kind of sucks that obviously they're having to get picked by these older men when there's a lot of young commanders or up and coming commanders, because we find out at the very end of the episode that Garth will become a commander. Now, he says it's because of what he did on the bus, or at least that's what Agnes mentioned. But I saw some people talking about too that possibly Garth could have ratted out the flower shop lady. So I don't know if that's true, but to me, it could be possible. And if he did do that, then that's going the route of Nick. They're really taking Garth towards the Nick character path where Nick is helping because he's Mayday, and so is Garth, but he's also flirting with like the people, like Agnes and Daisy, and like he's playing both sides, but he's also not afraid to be ruthless if that's the case. And so he's really taking that Nick path, and we're seeing that as his character is progressing, and it's becoming very like prominent. We also see Garth kind of step up for Daisy when that weird creepy old man is like touching her and telling her like if something about like if she behaves she'll be worthy, hopefully she'll be worthy, and it's just, I'm glad she snaps at him, but Garth had to step in and save her, because if not, like he said, she could have got like her tongue taken away or like something worse, because he was a commander. And that just goes to show like how creepy these older men are. Not to mention, we get that scene when the like older commanders are about to step down and go dance with the girls. One of the older ones says, "Fine looking batch this year." And that is just so disgusting. Like, these men literally see them as objects and like, once again, like livestock, or like something they can purchase or buy. It's extremely disgusting. And Commander Judd steps in and kind of tells them, hey, these are like your future wives you're talking about. Like, let's show some respect, which is surprising to me. I'll touch on this in a little bit too when I go to the parallels for the Testaments book, but in the book, his character is nothing like that. Speaking of Commander Judd, Judd pulls Aunt Vidala over and is basically telling her, hey, like, I'm gearing you up to take over Aunt Lydia's spot. And in the show, she's kind of like hesitant. It looks like she doesn't want to take over the spot. And in the book, she paints a very different picture, which once again, I'm sorry to keep saying, but I'll go over here in a minute. When these older commanders go down to dance with the girls, Becca gets one who is trying to make her drink. So, well, he does make her drink, and she kind of gets drunk, right? And this leads to the point where she is visibly drunk, because these girls have not ever had a sip of alcohol or anything that's, bad for them, really, because they're so like clean in Gilead. So it definitely affects her. She stumbles into the room, and it's at this point where Becca and Daisy go into the restroom, and they have like a heart to heart, like a talk, right? Like a drunk room talk. And Daisy even says, I've done this before. I've taken care of drunk people before, because she's used to being in the outside of Gilead world where teenagers drink and they have parties. Now it's in this moment where she's kind of like admitting she's scared. Like, she kind of slightly mentions like just not wanting to be there and like running away potentially. And for a second there, I kind of thought, are they going to go the arc of like Daisy and Becca? Kind of, if Agnes goes with Garth, are they going to try and pair up Daisy and Becca? I don't think that will happen based off that scene. But for a second there, I kind of thought that. Becca basically outright comes out to Daisy with that sentence about Agnes and her. And from there, Daisy's kind of trying to comfort her, reassure her, and kind of just like trying to be there for her and telling her without like blatantly telling her, hey, like, you're good to be who you are, like, you're fine. She kind of says it in a cryptic way, like, to be safe for Gilead, right? But then later on in the episode, we get Agnes and Becca talking, and Becca's clearly still like hurt and like scared and like frustrated and like doesn't want to be there. And Agnes finally goes to talk to her at the end of the episode, and Becca tells her, I just want to run away. And then Agnes is like, I'll run away with you, right? And like, that, as a teenager especially, can suck, right? Because like, you like somebody, they don't like you back, but then they're telling you this stuff that they don't mean in the way that you're going to take it, and they don't mean it that way, but you want to hold on to it in a way that you feel like you'd want them to say it to you. If that may have made no sense, but I think you could follow that maybe. But like, you're gonna hold on to that. Like, if somebody tells me I'll run away with you and I have this secret crush on them, like, I'm gonna be thinking about that all night, is what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, so Becca's definitely gonna hold on to those words that Agnes said to her. Speaking of Agnes and conversations, one thing I forgot to touch on is when Agnes was dancing with Garth and she was about to ask him something, and she just, I don't know, she kind of just like hesitated, and then he got a call on his walkie and had to leave. So I'm really eager to know what she was going to say, because I think we'll get that eventually. I also have to touch on the like job interview style interview that Agnes went through, and I guess all the other girls went through, with Commander Judd in that room. It was literally like interviewing for a job. I've been to interviews sometimes where there's like 4 or 5 people on the Zoom screen and it's just me. And that poor girl was having a hard time. Not only was she having a hard time, but I think the weight of what happened at the dentist was really weighing on her too. And for a minute there, I really thought she was going to tell Commander Judd about what happened in the dental office. She thankfully makes it through that little interview and it, I guess, seemingly went well. I guess we'll find out. But back in the like dressing room where the non-green girls are, it was so funny when, I'm probably not going to say her name right, but Jishiba came in basically shit talking Becca and Shunammite like slapped her. That was so funny to me, and I'm glad she did that because like even though Shunammite is like such a bee sometimes, she obviously really cares for her friends, and we see it in that moment. Now at the end of the episode when Aunt Vidala has kind of just got her ass chewed out by Aunt Lydia, she comes in and kind of like yells at the girls for basically drinking. I think more than, of course, Becca were given drinks. So she comes in there and talks about like how they're stepped out of line, but then they hear the bell ring and Shunammite is like, now? No, that's unfair. And we see Hilda come in. She started her period. And she literally says, I guess the tea worked. And you know Shunammite was just boiling. That poor girl was crying. I do feel bad for her because she truly wants, it to happen. But I think in a way it's kind of a blessing, and we'll maybe see that going forward. Like she's going to realize and snap out of the Gilead curse, and we'll maybe see like she's going to be kind of glad that she didn't get put into that situation yet. And then to end the episode, on the way home, it's Agnes and Commander Mackenzie or her dad in the car. Her dad's kind of like, hey, your mom would have been proud, happy to see you. And she thinks that he's talking about Tabitha, but then she realizes he's talking about Paula, and she gets really disappointed. And you can just see like how sad that made her, because she really loved Tabitha. Tabitha was such a good mom to her. And once again, I will touch on Tabitha here again in a second when I get into the parallels, but that's all really for this episode. Episode 5, Ball. There wasn't a lot in here. It was kind of a lot of little things, so not much to go on. I am excited for the next episode, though. Episode 6 is called Stadium, so I can't wait to cover that and to watch that. Next week can't come soon enough. Okay, now I'm going to get into the book versus the show. This is going to contain spoilers for future episodes if they use any of this from the book. So just keep that in mind if you don't want to know what could potentially happen in the future in this show. I'll touch on some of the things we already know. The timeline's different. Daisy is not Nicole anymore. And June is going to have a more prominent role in this show than she did in the book. In the book, June really only comes in at the end where she's reunited with Agnes and Daisy. But in the show, so far, she is taking the place of Ada. And another thing I'm going to bring up really quick, because this kind of plays into 2, and this is where I think they're going with this. So in the book, Garth is not in Gilead. Garth is not a guard. Garth in the book is a Mayday operative living in Canada that helps train and get Daisy into Gilead. So they kind of swapped him, right? They took him from Canada. He's now a guard in Gilead, helping from the inside. And this matters because since Garth's not there to train Daisy to get ready to go into Gilead with Mayday, then I think that's where June's going to come in, and we'll get a little bit more of June training Daisy on how to handle Gilead, which makes a lot more sense because she's had to play the role of essentially, the role of a handmaid. Like, she's been there so long. So she would be the one to really teach Daisy the ropes on how to stay quiet, how to stay in line, and how to just tolerate it. Now, speaking of Daisy, though, in the book, how she gets into Gilead is a little different than how she does in the show, which actually we haven't seen in the show, so I don't know how different it'll be. But in the book, she essentially, her parents die, same kind of thing. Ada comes to save her. She gets trained by Garth. And then she poses as a homeless person that Garth is her pretend boyfriend and like tries to beat her up so that the Pearl Girls will find her and try to save her. And that's how they get her into Gilead. She becomes a Pearl that way by getting the Pearl Girls to bring her in. In the book too, we got a lot more of Aunt Lydia's backstory. Once again, I'm not sure how they're going to do that going forward because we haven't had a lot of it yet. But I touched on episode 6 earlier, Episode 6 is titled Stadium. So in the Testaments book, Aunt Lydia goes over how she became an aunt. And one of the ways and one of the things that she goes over, she was a family court judge. But in the show, in The Handmaid's Tale and in this show, they have her as a teacher instead. But in the book, they basically wrangle all of these women up and they kind of like try to figure out where they would be best. If they would be best as a handmaid, if they'd be best as an aunt, if they'd be best, just like where they would best fit. And they are all wrangled into a stadium, which makes sense why the next episode would be called Stadium if they go that route. My guess is this is that point where we're going to get Aunt Lydia's backstory about how they all became who they were. Speaking of aunts, in the book, Vidala is a lot more cutthroat. Like in the book, she's really going for Aunt Lydia's job. She wants to be Aunt Lydia. She's constantly trying to like just undermine her and like really wants to take over. But in the show, we kind of see her more hesitant to want to take over, like when we saw her talk to Commander Judd. So they haven't really gone that route with her character. I think they're trying to make her a little softer, a little more likable in the show, which would kind of make sense because honestly, a lot of these characters in the book are written a lot more horrible than they've come off so far. Commander Judd being one of them. Granted, we haven't seen a lot of him and he's still a commander, so he's very, gross old man. But in the book, he's depicted as this like really gross looking guy. And in the show, he's not bad looking. He's also depicted as being just like very evil. And so far of what we've seen of him, he has not portrayed that. He's also been said to kill his young wives a lot, like to poison them. Like a lot of his wives would die of poisoning. And we haven't seen that yet either in this show. So I'll be interested to see what or if anything happens to his current wife, because in the book, he actually tries to get with Agnes. And Agnes eventually becomes an aunt because she does not want to be married because she gets scared. In the book, Agnes is also a lot more scared than she is in the show. Speaking of scared, Becca in the book is also very different. She doesn't have like a queer arc. In the book, Becca is actually assaulted by her father as well since she was a young girl. It's a really sad part of the book. I don't know if they'll make that a part of the show. I would assume so, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's one thing that differs so far from Becca in the book versus the show. Last thing I wanted to touch on was Tabitha. So Tabitha in the book is actually a pretty decent chunk of like the beginning of the book. She's not like a huge part, but we do get parts of her when she's still alive. So we kind of get to see her being a mom to Agnes in the book. And we kind of see when Agnes finds out she's dying, which by the way, Shunammite in the book tells her, hey, your mom's dying. And she doesn't know that because the Marthas in the house have been trying to shield her from it. But Shunammite's like, hey, your mom's dying. And she's just like really cutthroat about it, which is funny because in the book, Shunammite is portrayed as like her best friend. Whereas in the show, Becca is kind of her best friend. And Shunammite is basically having Daisy like be mean to Becca in the book. So there's just like a whole different dynamic. Whereas in the show, we're seeing a more like unified friend group compared to the book. Back to Tabitha, we see her telling Agnes the story of when she was saved. So when she got into Gilead and how she became Tabitha's daughter. Now the story they tell includes, they don't name June, but they kind of use characters and we get that whole story of when June and Hannah were running through the forest. In the story, Gilead saves her from like the evilness. So that's how they're telling these young girls, their backstories. Because she does in the book kind of remember running through the forest, right? So she kind of remembers what's happening or what happened in the past. So they have to kind of like warp the memory to get them to like kind of adapt to Gilead. So we kind of get to see that more in the book. So that about wraps up this episode. Thanks a lot for listening and watching. Check out my social media if you want to. Like I said, I post a lot of clips and videos on there. I look forward to coming back next week covering episode 6. I have a feeling that's going to be a really good episode and more action-packed than these last few have been. Hope you have a great week and blessed be the fight.